Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. And tonight we have special guest Owen Egerton. Let's see, writer, director, actor, producer. You've done the whole 9 yards. How you doing, Owen?
I'm good. It's really good to be here. You forgot to mention dancer. I'm a hell of a dancer, too. So.
We have to add that to your resume here as well. Love the Halloween poster in the background.
Oh, thanks. It's actually, funny enough, it's Halloween 4.
I loved Halloween 4.
Me too. It's like it is very close to my heart, and I love Halloween 4. So that was a gift from a dear friend.
Yeah.
Because I think it might be my favorite of all of them.
Halloween 4. It's funny. It's the first one after Halloween 3, which is Season of the Witch, which is totally not Michael Myers. And they decided smartly to bring back Michael Myers. And I loved Halloween 4. And I love the way they brought Michael back, him in the hospital. And I remember that scene when he's being tracked away in the ambulance and the paramedics talk about a surviving niece. And you see him clutching. Yeah, that was awesome.
I think he was like, I saw it, like, I saw it on video when I must have been, I don't know, 15, maybe 16, I'm not even sure. But for whatever reason, that was like the movie was like, I love this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd watched horror movies before and I'd been into horror movies for a while, I guess. But for whatever reason, that grabbed me in such a fun way. Like,
it was.
This is violent and weird and cool, and I freaking love it.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. So you have a little bit of a horror resume yourself. So how far are you a lifelong horror fan?
Yeah, I think I am. It's funny enough, like I didn't start, even when I started writing for film, I wasn't writing for horror, but I always wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
I became a horror fan way early on as a kid, watching, I guess the first couple of memories were like secretly watching My Bloody Valentine,
yeah,
watching The Shining on TV with my parents, and being freaked out but not understanding why, especially because it seemed like such a low body count.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, why is this so scary?
It's the psychological part.
Right, exactly.
My first memory of a horror film. Now I was born and raised in New York City, and cable TV did not come to New York till 1987. But what we had, I don't know if you this might be before your time, there was a service called WHT. It got swallowed up by HBO. And basically it was a little box that they had installed in your home. It only became active at 8 o'clock at night. And it was just movies from 8 o'clock to like about in the early morning hours. And my first horror movie I watched was the original Halloween on WHT. And I have just vivid memories of that opening scene of the hand opening the drawer, grabbing the knife, putting the mask on, going up the stairs and murdering his sister. That is my first memory of horror.
That's a great first memory.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about your stuff. Bloodfest. Great movie. You did everything. You directed it, wrote it, even had a part in it. And you produced as well, correct?
I wasn't officially one of the producers. I don't think I was. I wasn't one of the producers, but I work pretty tightly with the producers that I'm lucky enough to work with. But they've got skills like math that I don't have.
Yeah.
So
So when it came to Bloodfest, was it entirely your concept when you wrote it?
Yeah, I mean, the original concept was basically like, I love this thing called Fantastic Fest here in Austin, where I live, and I've always loved working with. I've worked with the Alamo Draft House, which you guys have also in New York, but it started here in Austin, and I have been working with them a lot of times, doing comedy shows for them and hosting screenings of films and doing something called Master Pancake and the Mr. Sinus Show, where we're making fun of movies or we're watching movies in weird ways. We're watching Jaws, but people are watching from inner tubes floating on a river. We did a screening of like a different, like with of Deliverance,
Yeah.
but on the like along a river where everyone had canoed to get there. We did a screening of Speed, but we were on a bus that we had rented, just driving around trying to keep the speed, up. And for that, I was like, I love the idea of anytime a movie kind of seeps out into the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And I came up with the idea of like, wouldn't it be fun to go to like a dream festival where everyone was watching the movies, but you could just walk around those screamscapes, those horror landscapes that we recognize from these movies. And I started going from there, and I started working with one of my favorite producers, Seth Kaplan, and then with Ryan Hall from Rooster Teeth, and we kind of developed it. Of like, this would just be a blast to make.
Yeah, it was a blast, and it's a great movie. That role that you had, did you write it with you in mind, or did you just happen to just do it?
Well, I knew it was a role I would love to do, but actually I wasn't officially cast as the role into about a week and a half into filming.
Yeah.
So there was basically the idea of like, I loved the role and it would be super fun, and I have done acting, but it was kind of the idea like, well, if we could get someone who was much cooler than me, then let's get someone much cooler than me. But in the end, I think I was lucky enough that we didn't get someone much cooler than me, and I was allowed to do it.
It's always good to be on the
similar to how
screen.
I feel about my marriage. Very lucky nobody cooler showed up.
Exactly. I feel the same way sometimes. Now, there was some very well-placed light humor in the film. Was that all written in the script? Was it ad-libbed? How did that come to be?
Let's see. Well, a lot of it was written in the script, but we did leave, and I love to do this when directing. I love to leave a lot of room open for what are the best ideas just coming through. I remember reading about Romero and doing Dawn of the Dead, of just like, okay, everybody, what's another idea? And someone yelling, what about a pie fight with the zombies? Like, let's do it. And of course you see that in the cut. It's like, well, that's pretty brilliant. Of like just letting people contribute. So like, there's some great ideas and some great one-liners that came from the actors, that came from the crew, that just came from people who just being excited to be there. I think a lot about Nick Rutherford. Nick Rutherford was in our cast, and he plays Lenjamin, and he is so funny. And it was like, it would be a crime to not let him just improv a few takes and just say the funniest things that come into his head, because it's so great.
It is. Now, how did it feel taking on a genre that's very difficult when you try to put some lightheartedness into a horror movie? It's a very fine balance, and you pulled it off quite nicely, but it does offer you some freedom because it's not really done as often as people might think. Did it allow you creative freedom to try different stuff and utilize different methods?
It was a funny thing, I got to say. It was something I think I discovered in the process of making the film, of how much we actually love the fun of horror. When we made it a couple of years ago, I think we were still in this phase of like, gosh, isn't it amazing? Hereditary is so incredible. The Lighthouse is so moving, and we love the Witch is wild. We love, all movies I love. None of which we would call fun. No. We wouldn't call fun. But I remember that when I think back to my childhood, it's like it's Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, that I love because it's fun and it's funny and it's fast and it's gory and it's scary, but at the top of the bill, it's fun. And I think I kind of rediscovered that even while making the film. I'm like, oh yeah, a horror film that's fun, that for me, that's often the horror film that I rewatch again and again and again.
I had Tom Matthews as a guest, and he was the lead in Friday the 13th Part 6. And I told Tom, Part 6 for me is like the last great Friday the 13th movie. Because I feel exactly the same way you do about it. It's a fun movie from the beginning of, his character Tommy going apeshit on Jason's corpse,
Yeah.
and him wanting
With
to make
Rorschach?
him wanting to make sure he's dead actually brings him back to life, Frankenstein style. So I mean, that was a total awesome honor to get to talk to him.
So cool.
Is there a special balance that you gotta, a tightrope you gotta walk when balancing humor with horror?
I think so. I mean, for me personally, I think horror and humor have a lot in common. There's like the setup, the expectation, the punchline, and there's also that beautiful sort of suspense that is sort of drawn out in a joke or in a jump scare.
Yeah.
So I think those two have a bunch in common. I think where horror, like I'm not usually a fan if horror too clearly winks at the audience. I think what I mean by that, it says, you know what, don't care if people die.
Yeah.
I think that can be like, oh gosh, I kind of lose it a little bit sometimes when horror says don't care if people die.
Yeah.
When you lose the stakes, I think you lose some of the scares. And that is a thin line, and I wouldn't know exactly how to define it.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. That is a thin line. And
I would think it's like instinctual. Like you
Maybe
can't
so.
really put it into words. It's just a feeling of what might and might not work. You know.
Yeah.
Now, Bloodfest also tackles what I would call some like social commentary issues, like violence in media. How important was this to you?
Well, I mean, one of the big things, even when talking to Tate Donovan, who, bit of a spoiler, but plays our villain,
Mm-hmm.
but I've always been slightly irritated and amused by media folks who are like, oh gosh, these horror movies are causing our violence, which is a little bit like saying that mirror makes my hair look bad. You're like, maybe the source is somewhere outside of the mirror.
Exactly.
And so I think there's something telling of like in our movie, as Tate and I were putting it, was like, well, gosh, the real scary villain in this world that we created of monsters and zombies and slashers.
It's us.
Actually, the worst villain happens to be a white man with a gun and a sense of privilege.
Exactly.
And I think it says a lot for our world.
It
today.
does. It does. When you're working in horror, are you a total practical effects guy when it comes to the blood and gore?
I love the practical effects. So like on Bloodfest, we got to work with Hogfly and Meredith Johns and her group, who I love to work with. And I think she told me that we had like the record of the amount of blood, like by gallon, like
Wow.
in any Texas-made film. I was like, I think she said we're really close. I'm like, well, add a couple of gallons because we're gonna make it. We did use a bit of CGI to sort of augment it, to add on to it a little bit. And that's, I think, basically how I love to work. I'm like, use the practical effects, get it out there. It's so much more fun to watch. It's so much more fun to feel. It's actually, quite honestly, it's so much more fun to film. I just love it. But then I'm also cool with like, and then you can come in the same way you're going to color a film, you're going to add the sound effects. So if you can improve it a little bit with special effects on that side, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah, use all the tools at your disposal. How do the actors feel about getting all messy with the blood?
They seemed okay at the time. There were a couple of extras. I remember being a little surprised with how bloody they got. But for the most part, I mean, I think it's what I was saying again about like it being so fun to film.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely know there are some filmmakers who are almost all CGI. So all the blood is CGI. And that's cool. And hats off to them. But man, I do love the thrill for everyone, actors most importantly, of the actual spray of blood, the physical sensation, like, oh my God, they just got into my face and some got into my mouth. That's great.
I'll tell you what, I've spoken to dozens and dozens of filmmakers. I have yet to talk to one who would pick CGI over practical effects when it comes to blood or gore.
Yeah.
You know, it's all the same. The practical effects all the way. Not only in the fun factor, but there's just something that makes it more authentic when it comes through on the screen. Do you agree with that?
Oh my gosh! I teach some courses for Sundance, and I teach like a horror screenwriting. And during it, we watch some of my favorite horror movies. And one of them that we're going to be watching for like the first class is The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. And the effects in The Thing are so damn good, and they're so practical. I would hate to replace those with CGI. You just couldn't. It just wouldn't feel the same.
No, it wouldn't. It absolutely wouldn't. When in the film, when you were working on different themes of the festival itself, was there a particular thought process or a sequence that went into that?
I think a lot of it, as we were making the film, we made the film pretty quickly. From sort of basically knowing we were going to make it to writing the script to filming. It happened to be like, there's a window to make this film. And part of my thought was make it a gauntlet. I was actually a little bit thinking of The Warriors.
Oh, I love The Warriors.
Me too.
Oh, love man. With, oh my God, Ajax. And man, you bring back some memories here.
Yeah.
James Remar.
Oh, it's just so good. And my thing is like, just make a gauntlet. Make some kids that you like, and then say you have to get from point A in hell to point B in hell. and that was that was a lot of it. And then it was like, okay, and what are the worlds that we can afford to make under our budget, and the locations that I had available to me. And that was sort of what made it. There was definitely like a bunch of other horror worlds that I would love to have visited. And maybe, who knows, if there's a sequel ever, maybe I'll get a chance to do that.
Now, one of the things that stand out is the location of the festival. It's awesome. Was it hard to secure that location? Walk us through how you guys got that location for shooting.
Sure. So one of our producers, who's a brilliant fella named Ezra Vanitas, who also was one of my producers on my first film, Follow, he jokes, he said, like, Owen came to me and said, well, I've got this horror film, and it's all basically in one location. But it turns out to make that location, we had to film in 12 different places. and that's kind of true. So we basically took a lot that does some of the Renaissance festivals here in Central Texas. And that was our central location. And then from there, all the individual worlds were kind of made at different places. Yeah. So partially we'd film out in the woods. We filmed actually at abandoned buildings at a Texas State Hospital, which was particularly creepy. Including some of the theater with the puppets watching movies on a screen.
Yeah.
That's in an abandoned building at a Texas State Hospital.
Wow.
Yeah, really wonderfully creepy. So we kind of, in a lot of ways, manufactured the feeling of one spot.
Yeah.
And that was, in some ways, that was the biggest budget trick of the whole film.
Well, you pulled it off. Now, as you mentioned, Bloodfest is before Bloodfest you did Follow. Okay.
Yes.
What would you say was the biggest difference going from Follow to doing Bloodfest?
Well, budget. I mean, I think was a big one. I mean, actually, let me take that back. I would say it's actually Rooster Teeth. So I made Follow with some cool producers that gave me basically just enough money to make this movie. Mm-hmm. I was very grateful. And then when I made Bloodfest, I was able to work with Rooster Teeth. Now, Rooster Teeth is based here in Austin, Texas as well. They're owned by Warner Media, and they have made all kinds of cool things. They've made a couple of sci-fi films on their own. They've made a really wonderful animated show called Ruby. They made a super exciting live-action series called Day 5. Really cool stuff. And basically, they're always making stuff. They're like just a tornado of talent. So when they got excited about making this film with me, it really tapped me into a community of filmmakers and creators, some of whom, by coincidence, I had worked with while making my first film, who had gone on to get a job with this wonderful company here in Austin.
Yeah.
And that was great. But it was just like, I think that was a big one of just like being able to work with all these creative minds who were thinking about what we could do and just throwing out ideas and making posters of movies that didn't exist for the props. And that was just super exciting.
Now, there's a quote in Follow: "Love never dies a natural death." What was the inspiration for that message? And it actually is in the beginning of the film.
That's right. Yes. Well, basically, like, with Follow, so I based Follow off a short story. I write novels and short stories as well. And, I based that off a short story of mine that was basically, like going into the idea of like, what is an expression of love? Mm-hmm. This might go a little bit silly or weirdly theological, but, there's a story in the Old Testament about Abraham, the patriarch Abraham, being told to take his youngest child and Isaac and sacrifice it. Yeah,
that's one of the most famous stories. Yeah.
Yes, one of the most famous stories, and one of those ones that I am like fascinated and disturbed and attracted to all at the same time. When God says, "If you love me, you will do the unthinkable and murder your child." And I was like, what does that mean? There's so many different things. And so, the origin of the story of Follow is a woman saying to her lover, "If you love me, you'll put this gun in your mouth and pull the trigger. Don't worry, it's not loaded. You just have to trust me." And so there's something about like, whoa, what happens with love? What happens with that kind of love where you love someone so much that you're willing to jump past logical thinking or even self-preservation.
Exactly.
And what happens after that?
It's like the trust game where you're in a circle and you fall back and trust that your friends are going to not let you fall.
Yeah.
Now, you said you write novels, short stories, and you obviously write screenplays. I would assume that writing novels as opposed to screenplays, it is completely two different worlds. Am I right?
It is. It really is. It's a funny thing. I think through the years, they've started to impact each other, the skill sets of both. In fact, right now I'm working on the screenplay version of one of my novels. Okay. And that's kind of a fascinating experience. But they very much are. I mean, partially because a screenplay or a film is a visual experience.
Yes.
You only know what someone's thinking by the expression they give or the words they say. Within a novel, I can dive into someone's thoughts. I can spend pages sort of flowing through their thoughts. And that's just it's a more internal art form in that way.
Now, was Follow your first directing feature film?
Yes, it was my first feature, yeah. I'd done some shorts, but yeah, that was my first feature.
Now, were you nervous going into direct your first feature film as opposed to doing shorts up until that point?
No. Yeah, I was nervous as shit. I was really, really nervous. Yeah, it was this weird thing of like, I'd written screenplays but I was jumping into waters and not knowing how to swim. And I knew I didn't know how to swim. But I kind of was aware, like, well, at this point, the only way to learn is to really get wet. So I was very lucky, very lucky with all the films I've done, to have producers and a crew who knew how to do so much. I've always been sort of realizing that I'm just sort of learning in the process. I didn't go to film school, so a lot of what I have to learn is just sort of like as I go. But I enjoy doing that. I kind of I kind of like the process of almost drowning.
I would think that spending just time on a set and just soaking everything in, how everything is done, even the verbiage that's being used, is better than anything a school can offer.
You know, you might be right. I didn't go to film school, like I said, so I can't quite speak to it. But I did learn so very much. And I have had friends who say, save your money for film school and put it towards your first feature. I've heard that. But also, I mean, I have a lot of friends who like went to AFI or different film schools, and I'm amazed at what they know and the depth of insight.
Now, with Follow, as opposed to Bloodfest, there's a nice combination of high tension and horror, which can also be very tricky. What was the challenge in trying to get that right?
Oh gosh, I mean, so much. You know, with Follow, we made it. We didn't have many days to film. We didn't have much budget to work with. We didn't have a stunt coordinator, so we couldn't really legally do any stunts, which is difficult. But that game of tension and playing with that, I actually have to credit a lot to definitely like how we directed it and how we paced it and how we edited it. But you could not achieve that without the work of the actors.
Exactly.
And so we were lucky to have like as our leads Noah Segan and Olivia Applegate, and they just made like a lot of the difference in that.
Now, I've heard many directors say 70% of directing is casting. Are you on that side of the fence?
I am. And I would love to, actually, quite honestly, I'd love to say I wasn't. I'd love to say,
it's all me. What? It's all me.
It's all me. Yeah. Like give me a stick and I'll direct that stick into doing wonders. But it is amazing how much an actor makes the character come to life and come to life with themselves. Like bring it's a particular sense of life to it. Yeah. The casting is so crucial.
Now, Follow is a much darker film than Bloodfest, and not I'm talking about any kind of gore or anything, but it does have moments of what you would call like levity. How much of that is something that came naturally, and how much of it was a personal choice that you made?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I started in comedy, and I still do comedy. I still perform comedy and even write some comedy. But comedy was kind of my way into filmmaking in a lot of ways. But I love horror. When I wrote Follow, I ended up sort of writing these sort of, it's dark with these kind of pinpricks of humor in there. And it just seems kind of natural to me, partially because, I don't know, that's just the human experience. I mean, even in the darkest of moments, we understand the darkness because there's a star up there that's giving us the alternative in some ways. So it just is a natural way. I also find the way of understanding death is kind of by laughing. I don't mean by taking it lightly necessarily.
No. Yeah.
And I think maybe that's part of it. Is like sometimes we think that laughing at something means we're taking it lightly. I don't know. It means we're finding it funny, and that might be something different.
I think laughter is a form of stress relief. A lot of people use it as stress relief. They could be laughing because they're just anxious or nervous as hell. You could laugh because something is just flat out funny. But it's just an emotion that it can go either way. Now, in Follow, Quinn and Thana's relationship is really intense. Was there any kind of challenge to crafting their relationship, both in the process of writing it and then bringing it onto the screen?
Yeah. So it's funny. Like in the writing it process, like I remember showing my then very new wife the short story when I first wrote it. and she was like, "Oh, this is awkward. This happens in our house in South Austin. I know what's going on here." I'm like, woo-hoo. Like, well, but she's dead. I'm like, no, you're alive. So that was definitely like bringing in maybe an intensification of like my own relationships, and then again like working with Noah and Olivia and having them rehearse together. We didn't have a lot of rehearsal time because of the budget, but they were great about finding that intensity. And basically, it was a realization as we went along. We were a very small crew. We were a small cast, and we learned more and more as we went, but almost from the beginning, that if this was going to work in any kind of way, it would take an intimacy of being willing to go to these darker places and intimate places.
Exactly.
I love to think of that film as being very much a love story, even though for a large part of it, one of the participants in the love story is a corpse.
Yeah.
But love is strange.
Exactly. Go to Gary Oldman Dracula. The log line is "Love never dies."
Yep.
Now let's move to some of your novels. Hollow, recognized as one of the best books of the year by NPR. What does that type of recognition? What did it do for you in your career?
That's a good question. It was funny. Career-wise, I'm not sure what it did for me, honestly. It was really wonderful to hear that. I found out that NPR had awarded that right when I think I was editing Bloodfest and filming Mercy Black, and I was thrilled because novels are my heart's love. But I'm not sure if it necessarily had a big paycheck or anything like that come around along with it. More, if anything, it was just a sweet recognition. That book particularly was like really heart work, soul work to write, and to find out that people enjoyed it meant so much to me. If that makes sense.
It makes absolutely sense. It's the recognition as opposed to it putting a monetary value on it. Now, moving forward, you have all these talents and passions, novel writing, script writing, you've directed and whatnot. Do you want to continue doing everything, moving a little bit of everything moving forward? Or do you want to focus on one or two particular areas?
It's a good question. It's a question I should be asking myself more often. I love doing it all, and so if I get the opportunity to do it all, I will. So I am still, writing screenplays, and there are definitely sometimes when I'm writing a story or a screenplay that I think, oh gosh, there's another director. She would be perfect to do this one. This is right for this person. And then there are ones that are like, I would love to do this, and I think my skills work with this. So I work in, and also I'm doing a fun podcast, a horror podcast that I'm writing and directing for Rooster Teeth right now that I'm super excited about. And so I think my joy is to continue to do it all.
Yeah, why not?
Let me, I'll do it all.
One of your more recent films, Mercy Black, where did the concept for Mercy Black come from?
So the original concept of Mercy Black actually started way back when I was working on Follow, and Follow was going to be. I've been writing for Hollywood, but Follow was going to be my first indie feature that I would direct, and we had lost financing. And for briefly, I was like, I don't know. We're going to make it. What's going to happen? And I was at a party with a friend of mine, and he started telling me about the Slender Man stabbings. Sorry. And I had not heard about that. And as he was telling me, I was thinking about another case that had happened when my mom was a little girl in England, and a story about a girl who had brutally killed two toddlers and then gone to prison. And then as an adult, when she had a daughter of her own, the press had kind of found her. and she had been under a different name,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps her family didn't know her situation, but everything came out
Oh
for her.
boy.
And it sort of struck me, those two stories of like the power, well, first of all, the power of being a 12-year-old kid, and how much we're sort of in between what we know to be reality and what we believe. So we're kind of in between, like, gosh, we know about the world and we get, the stuff of the world, but we still kind of believe in Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And so those two stories kind of combined, and I started writing Mercy Black.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Mercy Black uses a lot of quick cuts, visual triggers. Is that something that you worked very closely with the editor with?
Yeah, yeah. I worked with the same editor for a couple of my films, and for Follow, and for actually same cinematographer and editor for Mercy Black and for Follow. And Sean and I worked just really well together. Just sort of like discovering different aspects that would help cut things up, help add to the tension. And that was super fun. And then shortly toward the end, when we were finishing it up, I got a chance to work with, not to work, I just basically asked for the advice of C. Robert Cargill, who's a screenwriter of Sinister, and he co-wrote with Scott Derrickson, his the director and his writing partner, and Doctor Strange, and also, which is coming out soon, The Black Telephone. And I was basically like, what do you think? And he had some great suggestions specifically about, like, take some of this one particular story aspect, the backstory, and cut it up more.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Now, Mercy...
John was the main ingredients behind making all that work.
Now, Mercy Black is available on Netflix. Was it made financed by Netflix? Did they pick it up afterwards? How did Netflix get involved in this?
Yeah, so I made it for Blum. It was in Blumhouse. We're originally in that way, and then Netflix came in after the film, or when the film was in post.
Okay.
Basically, the film was in post, and Universal and Netflix came in then.
Wow, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's nice. I very much appreciate that.
Now, what are your thoughts on this sort of surprise? The way it was released and having all these big studios come in, and Netflix and Universal and Blumhouse, and wanting to take this movie. I mean, you got to admit, that's a pretty good ego boost.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun ego boost. I kind of find like an ego boost is almost like a little bit of it's like a double espresso, right? It feels great for about 2 hours, and then you get real sleep.
It fades away.
Yeah. So I mean, that was really fun, and I'm so excited. And I still get very excited anytime I see someone online talking about enjoying this film or that film that I've made. That's always a thrill, and I actually love that. I find, though, as much as I love that, what I really love, what actually ends up really feeding me, is making things. So I'm as eager as I am to celebrate any of those aspects. Like, I just want to keep making things. I love that process. I love being in the editing room. I love being on set. I love being in front of my laptop with a blank page. I love working with all these individuals to sort of make a weird world and a scary thing come true.
Yeah.
That's a thrill.
Now, to add to your list, you mentioned this earlier as well, you were noted as one of Austin's top comics. I mean, your talents just never cease to end. What was that like?
So I mean, I gotta say, Austin's been very good to me. So I've been in Austin since I came here for college back in the '90s, and right out of college, I basically I had one job, and then I realized I wanted to write a book, and I was working on this book, and I thought, I know what in my heart I want to be a writer. If I could just not have to pay rent, then I could have more time to write.
Yeah.
So I quit my job. I left my apartment and I moved into a VW camper.
Wow.
And basically, like, I went swimming at the free Barton Springs in the morning and showered there. And then I'd go to coffee shops all day, and especially with free refills. And then I would do comedy gigs at night to pay my way. And the comedy gigs kept going for me, which I'm very lucky. And I started working and doing comedy gigs at the Alamo Draft House, making fun of movies, with the Sinus Show, Master Pancake Theater, with my friends John Erler, who I still do shows with. And John is keeping Master Pancake online during the whole pandemic. He's been doing a brilliant job. And Jerm Pollitt, who is like the Elvis of my life, and inspiration. And just doing that was great. Like, Austin supported me by watching these comedy shows while I was struggling to write, and while I was trying to make the stories and the novels and the screenplays. And I've just been very lucky. So I still do comedy, and it still feeds me in a really beautiful way. I still get a really big kick out of it, and I'm just very honestly very grateful to Austin.
Are you a native Texan?
No, I was born in England.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I moved to Texas when I was a little kid, like about 3 years old, a little less than that.
Okay.
Moved to Texas.
Wow, that's great. Now, what should we look soon in the future coming from your direction? What do you have in the works?
Well, with Rooster Teeth, we are coming out with this podcast, a narrative podcast called Beneath, which is basically the story of an expedition that goes down to the Titanic.
Okay.
And finds that not everything there is dead.
Oh. Is this a horror? It's a
horror podcast.
Right. That's nice.
It's a blast to make. I don't know. I remember reading Stephen King's comments about how horror radio was basically the height of horror. And I didn't get it until I started making this podcast. I'm like, oh, it is so scary to hear a sound and not know exactly where it's coming from,
Yeah, H.G. Wells knows a little bit about something about that with War of the Worlds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
so I'm doing that, and then I've got some other things in the works. I've been doing some TV stuff and more stuff that I can't quite talk about, but I'm excited about.
That's awesome. Owen, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been so much fun, and we have a lot of stuff in common. I'm just impressed that you know the Warriors.
Wait a second. Can you?
Yeah.
See if I have my picture here. Oh, can you hold on for 1 second?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to see it. I'm a huge Warriors fan.
So, being a Warriors fan, you might know Michael Beck.
Yeah.
So this my framed photo of Michael Beck signed.
Oh, man. That is so awesome.
Yeah.
My favorite scene in The Warriors is when they come across the baseball Furies and they go into Central Park.
Yes.
Though that was badass,
So cool.
Good, because I'm sick of running from these wimps. I can quote that movie all day long. Owen, thank you so much for being our guest. This has been an absolute blast talking to you. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts you want to share before we go?
I was going to say thank you for what you're doing. It's such a bizarre time the last few years, and such a weird time in the world and weird time in America. I just love that you're supporting like weirdness in creation. About the idea of like, let's take all the nightmares that are coming our way and craft them into something beautiful and fun, and then talk about it.
Thank you.
Let's throw around that ball of energy and make something good out of it. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. That means a lot. And I want to thank all of our viewers. Thank you to Owen. Guys, stay safe. Until next time, on behalf of Owen Egerton and myself, stay walking. Good night.